What's up, everybody? We have 10-ish minutes here with Mr. Nick Laufenberg to talk about shooting off of tripods, and you have perfect timing on this now because at least at the time of this recording, and probably, still relative at the time of the release of this podcast, we've just come out with a tripod that is nearly dedicated to shooting off of a really, really stable platform. It's the Radian Carbon Tripod. And Nick, you do a lot of PRS shooting, and even sometimes I know that you hunt off of a tripod. You do a lot of shooting off tripods. And so we figured you're the guy to talk to about it if anybody out there is curious around the topic. Now, first off, I think that there's some, almost technique involved or something like that we'll get into. But I think one thing I know that I found myself curious in, it was actually a couple of years ago when I first wanted to try shooting off of a tripod. I didn't know what to get, how to set my gun up to shoot off of a tripod properly, and then what tripod to choose. Actually, we just mentioned a perfect one here. But how exactly, and this is something I'm sure we can touch on relatively quickly, how does one set up their rifle to be shot off of a tripod? What's a few things that you're going to need?
Yeah, well, for one, you need some way to attach the rifle, right? The rifle sitting in front of us here has a full-length Arca Swiss rail. These tripods, the Radian series, are set up with an Arca Swiss. In fact, all of our new tripods all have an Arca Swiss on top. Being able to just direct attach that is going to give you a super stable platform. It's going to be really solid when it locks up. There's also different clamps on the market that'll attach to the tripod, and then you clamp it to the fore end of your rifle.
Mm-hmm. Now, some guns I know in chassis have an Arca Swiss almost built into it, so you wouldn't need to add one there. It's almost kind of like a long dovetail running down the bottom of the fore end. In this case, this is the rifle that I built for Mark and I's kind of like Gucci versus quote entry-level long-range rifles. We actually attached this to the bottom of our KRG chassis, so this was a separate piece that was attached. If you're wanting to do with how about an AR with a full-length fore end? Do they make key mod and M-lock?
Yep, absolutely. So you can,
Swiss.
Whether you got key mod, M-lock, or I think there's even Picatinny rail adapters that you can switch over to Arca. It just clamps onto it. Regardless of what you have, there's something on the market that'll allow an Arca Swiss attachment to it. Even if you have a traditional style stock, folks like Area 419 make full-length Arca rails that'll bolt onto your traditional stock.
Oh, cool.
Now, we talk a lot about these full-length ones. Are there shorter ones as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you can get them either full-length for the whole fore end, or you can get just a small section of it, whatever.
Does it just depend on your rifle setup, what you want then, or do you recommend it seems like all the ones that I've seen, at least for PRS, it's like full-length is what people use. But
yeah, the full-length, it'll give you a very flat surface for the full length of your fore end, which is nice. If you're going to be putting your a rifle on a barricade setup with using a forward bag for your stable point. If you are going to be using it for a hunting rifle, maybe you have, let's say, a Harris bipod that attaches to your sling swivel stud. You're not taking that on and off all the time, so maybe just a single section just forward of your mag well would be useful then.
Yeah.
If you can decide to mount it to your tripod.
Gotcha.
So, all right, let's talk about the actual act of shooting with a rifle off of a tripod. Stance-wise, how are you setting up your tripod? What are you thinking of at very first?
Well, the first thing I'm looking at, and it is kind of a debated point, depending on who you ask, they're going to give you a different answer. I like, if I can, to set 2 legs back, 1 leg forward.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I do that comes down to 2 things. For one, the fundamentals of marksmanship. I really try to apply those as often and everywhere I can. Following through with your shot is super important. Consistency is precision. So if I have 2 legs back when that gun recoils, it's going to come on a straight path back. Whereas if I had only 1 leg back, depending on if I'm aiming left or right, it's going to favor a left or right recoil. So when the gun recoils, it could move differently. And for that reason, I really like it to have 2 legs back just for consistency purposes.
Mm-hmm.
Also, depending on which tripod I'm using, if I am using something like this ball head, it has a fairly high center of gravity in relation to the legs, whereas with something like the leveling head, it sits down a little bit lower, which is good for precision, but where you can run into is once you lock the rifle in, if you had that leg facing back and you drop a mag in, you might actually bump into that leg with your magazine.
As you're trying to move left to right or up, down, something like that. You were kind of showing us that with this rifle here. It was actually running into that leg when you had the one back.
Right. And when you lock your rifle into your tripod, you really want to try to lock it into somewhere close to the center of gravity for the weapon system. And for most precision rifles, like a bolt action rifle like this, that's going to be just forward of your mag well. If you have to slide the rifle back so that is locking up closer to the end of your forend, just so that your magazine's not touching, it's not very conducive to accuracy.
And is that just because, like, if you were to set this up in this tripod here, the radian carbon with the ball head, do you want it to almost be able to just sit there then on the tripod? Because if you have it too far back, it might start tipping back or something like that. That just implies the weight.
Right, and that relates back to the fundamentals of marksmanship, natural point of aim. You want to be able to rest into that rifle without having to muscle it on the target. You want to be able to sit calmly without any additional muscle stress that could change under recoil. So you want, when you pull the trigger, you want to recoil naturally, your body to absorb it naturally and to settle back on the target naturally.
Yeah, it seems like, putting that rifle at its natural balance point just makes sense from, I guess, the reason why you're using the tripod, right?
Right.
Is to have that stability, to have that accuracy, and to really use it to its fullest potential. You might as well have it doing as much work as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you don't want to have to, it kind of regards to any unconventional shooting, not laying prone with your bipod. If you're shooting off of a tree limb, trying to shoot off of a stump or a rock or off of a tripod, you want the gun and that platform to rest naturally together. And that's going to give you the most stable and repeatable position possible.
Yeah. Now, what I'm assuming basically anytime you can shoot off a tripod, meaning that probably you're not going to be doing a whole lot of like running and gunning, so to speak, running around. Would you say that basically anytime you can be shooting off of a tripod, you're relatively stationary, that you would shoot off of a tripod? Maybe if you're hunting, some cover things or whatever might dictate that, but if you can, would you? Because is it basically almost always better? Or
no, I think that if I had the chance to lay down prone and shoot, I'm gonna do that.
Okay,
it is a lot more stable than shooting off a tripod. Even though these tripods are super stable, you're gonna have some induced wobble. Now, depending on your experience and how squared up you are behind the rifle and how well you have that tripod position for your body height and everything, you're going to have less and less wobble, but still more wobble than you would if you were shooting prone off of a bipod.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Can you set this bad boy up and show us what it would look like if you were shooting behind it? We can obviously just use one of these tripods. Like we said, so the radian carbon, it comes with, it will, depending on which one you get, it'll come with one of these heads. There's a ball head, which has more cant ability to it. You can cant it all the way up to 90 degrees in certain cases. In the leveling head, you can't cant as much, so maybe you can't as much. So maybe for super high angle shooting, not ideal there, but it's a little bit more, like Nick said, a little lower center of gravity, a little bit more intuitive to use, a few less knobs and whatnot. But
yeah, so regardless of if I'm shooting off a tripod, trying to shoot off a barricade, tree limb, rock, or whatever I'm doing, I really want to square my shoulders up to the target. So keeping my feet straight, keeping my shoulders straight perpendicular to the target, and then leaning into your rifle like this. Move my...
Oh, yeah, you got your mic. Sorry about that. All right. So, yeah, your stance there is pretty... nothing super out of the ordinary.
No.
But so how do are your feet pretty wide apart? Are you more leaning into the gun, or are you just trying to stand up straight? And
right now, if I have this tripod position for a standing shot, I'm having my feet basically just a little bit further than shoulder width apart, and the tips of my shoulders would be facing directly at the target. So if you were to draw a point from my right shoulder, my left shoulder, and draw them both at the target, you make a perfect triangle.
Got it. And then are you loading the tripod at all? Kind of like you load a bipod sometimes, or
a little bit. I'm gonna load the tripod once I get on target, and then once I'm locked into my target, depending on the rifle I'm using, and that's going to be a big thing, how much the rifle recoils. In a lot of competition rifles, we're using super heavy rifles, very low recoiling rifles. we're not going to load into the tripod a lot because we don't have to absorb a lot of recoil. If I was shooting something like, let's say, a 300 Norma off of this, I'm probably going to lean into the tripod a bit, and I'm going to use that front leg as a point to lean into.
Okay, got it.
Okay.
What do you do? What do you do with your hands? Because you got one hand, obviously, that's got to pull the trigger, so that's a no-brainer. Your offhand, is that like, when you're prone, it's easy, it kind of tucks up underneath the stock. When you're standing or kneeling, it's got to be out there on the forend. Now you've got the tripod doing the job of your offhand that would be supporting underneath the forend. What's it doing? Is it on the tripod? Is it on the gun? Is it?
Great question. So that's going to come somewhat down to personal preference. I can tell you where I like to. I mean, I've seen people cross their arm in front of the tripod, or on, to use the what would be like support side.
Okay.
Now, is that stabilizing the tripod? Is that stabilizing you? Is it doing a little bit of both? What's going on there? Because I see that quite a bit too. People use that technique.
Personally, I don't use that technique, and I don't know why you would.
That's
me.
You
myself.
see it a lot.
You see it a lot, yeah. What I want to do is try to stabilize the weapon system as close to the pivot point as possible. So if I'm shooting off of, let's say, a bag off of an inanimate object, I'm going to reach my arm forward, grip onto the forend of the rifle and the bag and whatever I'm trying to rest on. With my rifle here, I actually like to grip the head and rock into it.
Mm-hmm.
And by leaning forward and being able to try to pull that head back into my shoulder, especially if I'm shooting something with some recoil, I'm able to essentially like loading the bipod. So if you're shooting prone and you have a bipod that's got a little bit of take up in it, you try to load into that bipod so when you recoil, you're recoiling straight back. It's the same principle with this.
Okay.
You're trying to load into the tripod so that recoil is consistent and straight back. So as I mentioned, both legs being backwards like this, the two legs being back, when the gun recoils, it just comes straight back and straight forward. Now, if I were to turn this, see if I can do it without tipping over the gun.
Got a table in your way, all sorts of obstacles.
All kinds of stuff. So when this gun recoils, if I'm leaning straight back, that leg's mostly just going to absorb recoil, and that's fine. But as I turn my body this way to maybe pivot and take a shot in this direction, it's going to lean that way. If I turn it this way, it's going to lean. It's going to be an exaggerated left or right recoil.
Yeah.
When I look at that, it's like I'm picturing, the way you had the tripod. Like I said, there's no right or wrong, and you see people do this both ways, right?
Correct.
As far as their leg orientation. But to me, intuitively, and now admittedly, I haven't shot off a tripod a lot, but I look how you're addressing the tripod or even your rifle system. You're not doing it on one leg.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
You're almost mimicking what the tripod is doing for that increased stability. Now, I did want to ask, Nick, when you're getting into the gun, when you're kind of maybe loading the system or whatever, you're going to move the crosshairs. Like when you have the gun perfectly set up, like it's stationary, right? But then so are you doing anything to manage that so the crosshairs are where you want them when you get into the rifle? Or are you leaving a little bit of not tension, but like lack of tension in the head so you have that mobility to get back on target? Or how are you managing that? There's the question.
Well, if you have the proper setup and having yourself positioned towards the target, squared up to your target well, as you address the rifle, you shouldn't have to do a lot of movement around. You might have to slightly adjust your elevation or left and right once you get on the gun. But if I knew where my target was and I knew that I was pointed very close to where that target is, I'm not going to have to move around much. And then if you follow through with the rifle, if you have the tripod set up properly for your shooting position, you're probably not going to have to do a lot of movement to get back on target. In fact, if you're shooting, most centerfire cartridges, if you get on the rifle, pull the trigger, the gun's going to move around, but when that tripod resettles back in, there's a good chance your target's going to be in your field of view.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like I would want to leave like a little bit of slack though, in case. I know what you're saying. Almost like not completely lock the head down in place, like hard lock.
Right.
Because if something even changes a little bit, then you're like
trying
to fuddy
so
around
you're
with
asking
moving the whole
like,
entire tripod.
If the target moves and you have to reposition, is that what you're saying?
No, I think what he was getting at was like you take a shot.
Yeah.
You know more about shooting with tripods than I do. The last time I did it was a long time ago with an AR. But take the shot, maybe you're jar a little bit. Maybe the tripod settles in the ground slightly differently. Maybe something happens where you're not perfectly on the target. If you locked your head completely in place, it was literally like locked right there. Something settles differently, and then you come back to the target, and it's not right on the target. You're going to have to loosen up the head and then move it back to the target and then tighten the head down again. Whereas if you leave almost that little bit of
play in there.
Yeah, a little bit of mobility. You're not fully locked on the tripod head. Then
yeah, I see what you mean. I think if you go out and you try it, you might find yourself to be a lot less stable if that's even a little bit loose. I like to get myself on target and lock that ball down.
Okay,
and
cool.
Then if I need to move it, it's just a quick twist, and I can move it around again.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Well, and like I said, I mean, you've done it more than we have, so. But interesting stuff for sure. I love shooting off tripods, though. I mean, when I can't, when I did it, took the old father-in-law out, and he hadn't shot many guns before. And I mean, we basically just set him up. I was like, shoot that target over there. And it was just boom, ting, boom, ting, boom. I mean, he couldn't miss. It was awesome.
Well, it's super intuitive. And I think that a lot of people, especially for hunting, I mean, this is not a light tripod. I think this one weighs about 7 pounds with the ball head. And I think it's a worthwhile compromise to be able to throw that in the backpack and be able to shoot literally anywhere.
Yeah.
Well, I hunt off a tripod a lot.
Right, yeah. Talking with you, Nick, prior to our this fall's gun season, I'm like, oh, Nick, what's your plan? He's like, oh, man, I've got a spot where I can shoot, like, I think it was like 700 yards, correct me if I'm wrong, but you go up, you set up shop, you get the tripod ready, and you've got a heck of a shooting lane out there.
Right.
You're covering some serious ground.
Yeah, the location where I hunt, depending on where I sit, you can get to about 650 if you're really pushing it. But where I typically sit in that spot, I can very easily see 450 yards.
Okay.
And in Wisconsin for deer hunting, that's a pretty long shooting lane. It's not very common to find that in the pastures and the hunting grounds around here. But with the tripod setup, I'm able to very accurately take shots out to that range.
Yep.
Do you ever use a sling
For my tripod?
while you're tripod shooting?
Absolutely. I don't do it very often, but there are some techniques to kind of lock down the system. I can show you real quick. I don't have a sling with me to demonstrate it, but essentially what you do is you'd have the sling attached to the front of the tripod here, or not to the front of the tripod, front of the forend. You would detach it from the rear and wrap it around a leg, and you can twist that sling into place, kind of like the throttle on a motorcycle.
Okay, right.
And once it's twisted down, it actually kind of really locks everything down a little bit tighter, because that's even if you lock down the tripod, you still move it around and still got some wobble, but you have that extra connection point to the front, to the leg, that'll reduce that wobble even more.
For sure. Cool. Good stuff. Awesome. Well, before we make this a 20-minute talk, we do have there's like a soft limit and then a hard limit. We'll cut this one out, but I think there's more stuff on tripods we can certainly get into in the future. If you guys want to hear that, let us know what it is you'd like to hear in the comments below or on Instagram. Nick, thank you very much for joining us.
Absolutely.
We'll catch everybody next time. Bye.
Bye.
Sweet. Yeah, I got, what did I get? It was like 4 years ago. I got a slick tripod.
Yeah.
And I got a Manfrotto head for it. And I had to get like an M-Lock weird Manfrotto head attachment. And I tried like 3 different ones. I finally found the one that sort of locked into the head. Well, I shouldn't say sort of. I mean, it does, but it's like, I don't know if they were really meant for each other. But, yeah, I finally got that thing set up, and it was an 18-inch AR, and then the thing.
It's so much fun.
It is fun.
Once you
it hammers.
From where I hunt, I'm kind of sitting. It's not like a big drop off or anything, but from where you sit, from where these 2 back legs would be to where the front legs. I mean, one's extended all the way, and the others are as short as possible. And even then, sitting down with the tripod, especially if you take a bag like your backpack and put it as a rear bag in the back. Oh my God, you're just so solid. And I guess it's a very simple thing once you've done it a couple of times.
Yeah. It really makes those long shots. They just don't seem as long because you are so stable.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's like glassing off a tripod. It's
right. Yeah.
You glass off a tripod and you're like, oh my gosh, it's like my optical quality just improved.
Yeah.
I'm looking through the same binos, but.
Jim, you'll like this. Back when I with my first AR, I had a Viper 6.5 to
You've
20
had an
on.
AR?
I got 3 ARs now.
Good golly, Miss Molly.
Oh yeah,
You need to
Nick, it's been a
play a
minute.
little catch up here.
Mark is swimming in ARs now. It's weird.
Jesus
Jim,
Christ.
One day, and he just
It's like, no, I got them. Got 'em
ARs.
all.
It's like this came in, and then I got tactical, and now I've got a bunch of ARs.
You got the operator beard.
That was the
ready to go.
catalyst. But so I had my original AR.
Crystal made him move to a boring house with a smaller garage, and so now he's like retaliating.
It
Oh,
is.
no.
It's not like that much smaller. It is smaller though. There's a pond in the back though. Pond's good for you, Jim. But anyway, here's where I'm going.
Pond or pool? Pond's good for you.
This was a long time ago. It was like right when we came out with the original Spark.
Yes.
Okay. So I had a Viper 6.5 to 20 on top. Still a fantastic scope.
Yeah.
This is my coyote rig. I put the Spark on a 45 offset, and then
heavens.
I can't remember what mount I had, but I put a Manfrotto plate on the bottom rail, or somehow I had it, and then put that into a Manfrotto head tripod, and it was actually kind of cool.
That's the equivalent of like if we were your kids. That's the equivalent of like you coming up to us and being like, "Yeah, kids, I used to own a Plymouth Hemi-Cuda back in the day. Me and the boys used to head out to Rural Route 12 and we'd drag race until the
Yeah.
cops got called, and then we'd all rip off through the field and never to be seen again until the next weekend." You had like you were cool, and now we're looking at you like, no way.